Hi, I'm Daniel Benjamin, and I'm the director of the Dickey Center, and I teach in the Gov department. And I'm really pleased that we have been able to put together this new class on epidemics in history. Let me begin by saying that I hope you are all healthy and well settled at home or wherever you may be. I know this is an incredibly difficult time for everyone. And I can only say on behalf of the faculty that we hope you're doing as well as possible under the circumstances, and that we're all here to do what we can to help. Let me apologize in advance. I spent 10 years of my life in the government at the White House and at the State Department. I've done, I think, video conferences every single day of those 10 years, and I still find remote learning and lecturing into a screen to be incredibly difficult and a bizarre experience. So let me apologize in advance for my own ineptitude and for the low production values of this presentation. And at the same time, let me just promise you that I'm quite sure that my colleagues, the faculty who are producing lectures for this course, will do a much better job. Now, as everyone knows, this is a truly unusual time. No one, or virtually no one, alive today in the US or elsewhere in the West has experienced an epidemic like the coronavirus or the very difficult restrictions that we have upon personal mobility and the like in their lives. There's been nothing quite like it. We hope that this unusual course is a case in which we will be rising to this moment, to this really difficult challenge. There will be more than 20 faculty and guest speakers participating in the course through remote lectures. Most of these faculty will be providing readings for their talks. And of course, we expect you to do your best to get through all of that. Additionally, I will be posting as much as I can of the extraordinary profusion of really interesting articles that are coming out every day on the crisis. And I encourage you to read them should you have time. There's some really fascinating reflections going on. Now, beginning next week, we will hold live Zoom discussion sections so that we can bridge the gap to the extent possible between us and you, and to deal with the impersonality of these asynchronous lectures. I will be putting up sign-up sheets for the different times that are available. I sent out an announcement asking everyone to let me know what time zone they're in. So far, I have not gotten any that are outside of the continental US. So please, if you haven't already, let me know. Do let me know where you are so that we can make sure that we're not scheduling only for sessions in the middle of the night for some of our students, which obviously is not what we want. I would also just say, please do check in with Canvas as frequently as you can, because faculty are still posting new readings, and those lectures will be coming fairly soon. So let me underscore, there are no prerequisites for this course. No background in history, government, biology, or any other subject is required. But let me also say at the outset, this is not a course in the first instance about virology or any other aspects of biology or epidemiology, though I think that you will find the material in the readings that deals with these issues to be quite interesting and to be quite important for understanding why the different pathogens behaved, why the different epidemics developed the way they did. So I hope you'll pay attention to that. This really is a course about the historical events of the major epidemics, the impact they had on societies, and the way that they really reshaped society, economies, art, culture, literature, and popular attitudes toward any number of different phenomenon of the time. There really is no overstating just how important some of these epidemics have been in terms of human history. And just to give you an idea of what you'll be looking at in the next couple of months, I want to show you a few slides. So plagues of one kind or another have troubled humanity for all of recorded history. If you've read the Old Testament, you encounter not only the famous 10 plagues of Exodus, and I believe that this is a medieval manuscript illustration of number 6, the plague of boils, which will be recounted, by the way, the 10 plagues will be recounted just next week during Passover, but others as well, other plagues as well that were sent as punishments for various grave offenses. And of course, there was a profound feeling that these plagues were going to be divine retribution or divine punishment for all kinds of offenses. This is the Emperor Justinian, or at least a mosaicist belief of what he looked like. He ruled the Roman Empire in the 6th century of the Common Era, and a famous plague that began in 541 and which recurred multiple times over the 2 centuries thereafter is named after him. That is the Plague of Justinian. And it was long considered one of the worst pandemics in history. Historians debate exactly how many people might have died in this plague. Estimates range from 25 to 100 million people in a period when, of course, the Earth was much more sparsely populated. But in all, that was possibly half of Europe. Now, some scholars today question those numbers, but I think that it is accepted that it was an enormous historical event. Rome, as you'll recall, had been abandoned in the 5th century, and the empire was ruled from Byzantium in Asia Minor at that point. And one argument that has been made was that Justinian's effort to reclaim the entirety of the Roman Empire and to reestablish its power over Western Europe had to be abandoned because of the tremendous impact of the epidemic. And by the way, this epidemic, after quite some study, has also been established to have been the bubonic plague. Well, the bubonic plague made perhaps its most renowned or famous mark in history during the Black Death, which began in 1347 in Europe and continued for several years, and then there were further recurrences of it as well. This is a painting not from the 14th, but from the 16th century. It's Peter Bruegel's great painting, The Triumph, been widely thought of as referring to the late medieval world and to a world in which death was omnipresent, and the plague played an enormous part in that. And if you can look at the details, you get a sense of the real darkness of the vision here. There are some figures, I believe, who look like they're stricken by illness. In any case, this was a period of extraordinary disruption due to the bubonic plague. And, one of the questions that I hope we get to examine later is to what extent that profound interruption had the ironic effect of laying the basis for the Renaissance, the rise of modern science, economic growth on an unprecedented scale, and the like. That is one of the really fascinating things about what plagues have done to our societies, even if the human costs were staggering. This is a not very good picture of a child with smallpox. I think it's from the 60s, perhaps the early 70s. Smallpox haunted the world for centuries and killed and maimed millions. Many of its victims survived, and there were different varieties of smallpox cases. One famous person who had smallpox, and this is not terribly well known, was George Washington, who had a very mild case during his one trip abroad to the Caribbean. But it was because of those mild cases that many developed immunity, and the issue of immunity led to the discovery by William Jenner of this phenomenon and led to the innovation of vaccination. Smallpox remains the only case of a major infectious disease that has been eradicated. And that last case of smallpox occurred in 1977. Typhus. Like some of the other epidemics of the last millennium is bacterial. Cholera is another, and not viral like smallpox. It has been closely associated with world wars. As you can see, the woman in this picture has this very distinctive emaciation that is associated with typhus. It was rampant in the ghettos of World War II and in the concentration camps, and remains a threat to this day. Well, I hope you can make sense of this picture. This is the Spanish flu of 1918, 1919. This is a remarkably little discussed episode in our history. This is some kind of infirmary that has been rigged up with hundreds and hundreds of patients. The Spanish flu, the Spanish flu is estimated to have killed perhaps 50 million people in that period. That would mean it killed substantially more than World War I itself, and it arrived just as the war was winding down. One scholar has asserted that the Spanish flu killed more people in half a year than AIDS has in roughly 4 decades. So plagues and epidemics have often brought out both the worst in humanity and sometimes also the best. This is a medieval depiction of a community that had blamed its Jews for the plague itself and had apparently burned them at the stake or burned them in punishment. It was felt that the Jews, in one way or another, had caused the plague. As I said, brought out the worst, but also brought out the best. This is a picture of a man who became a world hero, Jonas Salk, who created the first vaccine against polio, a disease that crippled and maimed millions around the world, and which was an enormous cause of anxiety and fear among probably your grandparents' generation. Salk devised the vaccine, and it was deployed effectively in 1955, I believe. And to this day, everyone in the United States is vaccinated or inoculated against polio. It's also the best candidate since smallpox for global eradication, and really only exists in a few countries to this day. So, AIDS. This is a picture of Tom Hanks playing lawyer Andrew Beckett in the movie Philadelphia from 1993, one of the very first mainstream cultural depictions of AIDS, which had been a subject of enormous concern, myths, discrimination, and all kinds of really appalling behavior when it first came to light in the early 1980s, and a great and terrifying example of how misconceptions about particular pathogens can lead to discrimination and various other kinds of mistreatment of minorities. And then finally, our latest cause for concern. This is, of course, COVID-19. This is an electron microscope picture of the coronavirus that is causing us the disruptions that we're familiar with today. And I think one of the fascinating questions that we will be contemplating in this course and in the months ahead is, how does a highly globalized, profoundly interdependent world deal with a pandemic that spread in part because of that high level of globalization, but which national leaders are using all too often as a reason for discrimination, for hardening relations, worsening relations between different countries, for turning the race to create a vaccine into a matter of national prestige. This is really one of the fascinating topics and one of the great challenges of our time. So let me just close on a personal note. You may be wondering why a former government official who worked, as I did, principally on terrorism issues, is interested in epidemics. And I want to just tell you about two quick episodes that had a profound impact on my outlook on history. The first was when I was a college undergraduate, and I took a course on medieval and Renaissance history. And I was fortunate to hear lectures from a scholar named David Hurley, who was one of the great historians of the 20th century. And I have never forgotten his discussions about the Black Death and how dramatically it reshaped the history of the West. And that has really stayed with me from my undergraduate days. I was 19 when I heard those lectures. And even though we had no epidemics going on at that time, I think it was a case in point of how deeply we can all be affected by great teaching and really powerful ideas. The other episode that I want to mention was in the late 1990s when I was working on the National Security Council staff in the Clinton White House. At that time, we had just had 2 embassies blown up by Al-Qaeda in East Africa. And we had good reason to believe that terrorists, including Al-Qaeda, were working on biological weapons, including anthrax and bubonic plague. And at that time, we began working with the Department of Health and Human Services and FEMA on preparedness and on stockpiling of medicines and medical equipment and vaccination production and the like. It was also a time when we were ramping up medical surveillance domestically so that cases of infection could be detected quickly and the government could take appropriate action. And seeing the modeling of what might happen if there was a major epidemic, whether caused by terrorists or naturally, was also, for me, a deeply moving and worrisome thing. I felt then, as I feel now, that the chances of a biological attack are relatively small, and certainly small compared to the possibility of a naturally occurring infection such as we have seen with COVID-19. But I think one of the big questions that we will face in this period is what happened to that work from the late 90s, what happened to the work that I know was continued for many years thereafter, as policymakers remained quite concerned about the possibility of a global pandemic. As we went through the two other coronaviruses, SARS and MERS, earlier in this century, and also the flu epidemic of 2009, and finally, and I think most scarily from the perspective of the popular imagination, the Ebola crisis of 2014. So I think one of the things that citizens will be asking is, did we learn enough? Were we prepared? Why, after these experiences and the clear demonstration that a globalized world was at risk, did we fail to do more? And I think that that is a subject that we should be discussing in this class and among all citizens in the US. So that, I hope, will give you some sense of what we will be looking at in this course. It's an extraordinary lineup of lectures that we have. I'm hugely grateful to the many faculty members who are pitching in. There will be a few more lectures, I believe, added to the course and additional readings. I hope that you find this material engaging and stimulating. And on that, I will sign off and send my best wishes. So I hope you you stay well and can make the most of this very difficult situation.